In 1853, the Weston plantation recorded an incident so bizarre that the county sheriff refused to write the full account. A 10-year-old enslaved girl named Sella vanished into the marsh, and the overseer released all 10 of the master's prized hunting dogs to drag her back alive. By sundown, the search party found the circle where the pack had cornered her. But only one dog was standing. 9 bodies lay scattered in the mud, and the overseer insisted Selah had done it without touching a single one. His story was mocked at first, until the plantations around Weston began reporting signs that something was stalking him. What mistake did the overseer make that turned his own dogs into the proof of his downfall? And how did a child slip through all 10 of them? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The sun hung low, heavy as iron. Selah wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand and finished scattering corn across the dirt floor of the chicken pen. The hens clucked softly, pecking at the grain with quick, careful movements. She counted them one by one, 12 in all, same as yesterday. None missing, none hurt. She moved to the pig trough next, dumping scraps from the kitchen house into the wooden bin. The 2 sows grunted and shouldered each other aside, eager for their supper. Selah placed her hand on the larger one's bristled back, feeling the warm muscle shift beneath her palm. The pig turned its head toward her, small eyes blinking slowly. "Easy now," Selah whispered. "There's plenty." She had always been this way with animals. They trusted her. She understood their moods, their sounds, the tilt of their heads when something troubled them. She never rushed them or shouted. She simply watched and listened until she knew what they needed. The mule in the far pen brayed once, and Selah crossed the packed earth to check his water. She refilled the bucket from the well, careful not to spill a drop. The mule lowered his head and drank, and she stroked his neck while he did. Isaac would have loved this part of the day. Her little brother always begged to come along when she tended the animals. He was 6 years old, all long limbs and bright laughter, and he loved the chickens most of all. He would chase them in circles until they flapped their wings and scattered, and Selah would scold him gently, trying not to smile. But Isaac had not been with her this morning. She had not seen him since the night before, when they shared a corn cake before sleep. She told herself he was helping in the fields or fetching water. Sometimes the mistress sent children on errands that lasted all day. Still, her chest felt tight when she thought of him. Selah picked up the empty feed bucket and walked toward the kitchen house. The late afternoon air was thick with moisture, the kind that made every breath feel like swallowing cloth. Cicadas droned in the trees beyond the fence line. She rounded the corner of the house, heading for the back door to return the bucket to its hook. That was when she heard the voice. Mistress Caroline Weston sat in the parlor just beyond the open window, speaking to someone Selah could not see. The mistress's tone was light, almost cheerful, the way she spoke when she wanted to sound reasonable. "It was the only solution," Mistress Weston said. "The debts were mounting, and I couldn't let word spread that we were struggling. A woman in my position must maintain appearances." Selah froze. She pressed herself against the wall, still holding the bucket. Another voice replied, older, female, harder to hear. Selah caught only fragments. The boy, so young. 6 years old, yes, Mistress Weston said, but strong for his age. The trader assured me he'll fetch a good price further south. Cotton country needs hands of all sizes. Selah's heart stopped. "Isaac, and the mother?" the other woman asked. "She doesn't know yet," Mistress Weston said, her voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial. "I thought it best not to say anything. She'll grieve, of course, but what can she do? It's done. The boy left this morning." The bucket slipped from Selah's fingers. It hit the ground with a dull thud. She did not wait to hear more. She turned and ran, her bare feet slapping the dirt as she raced back toward the animal pens. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred. She stumbled once, caught herself, kept moving. Isaac was gone. Sold. Taken. She reached the pig pen and collapsed against the fence, gripping the rough wood with both hands. Her mind spun in wild circles. The mistress had sold her brother to pay for dresses, or furniture, or whatever fine things she wanted, and she had not even told their mother. Selah forced herself to breathe slowly. Her hands shook. If Isaac could be sold without warning, then so could she. Any of them could. At any moment. For any reason. She could not stay here. The thought arrived clear and cold. Like water from a deep well. She had to leave. Tonight. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. Selah moved through her chores with mechanical precision, her mind working several steps ahead. She pocketed scraps from the kitchen when no one was looking, a piece of dried pork, half a biscuit, a wizened apple. She folded them into a scrap of cloth and hid the bundle beneath her thin mattress in the quarter house. She thought about the trails she knew. The West Marsh stretched for miles, thick with cypress and black water, and places where even hunting dogs lost the scent. She had walked those paths before, guiding the mistress's carriage mule when he wandered too far. She knew which routes were stable, and which mud would swallow a boot. As dusk settled, Selah went to the quarter house and checked Isaac's bunk. The blanket lay folded at the foot of the wooden frame. His small tin cup sat empty on the floor. A girl named Patience sat nearby, braiding her own hair. She was 9, a year younger than Selah, with wide eyes that always seemed frightened. "Did you see Isaac today?" Selah asked quietly. Patience's hands stopped moving. She looked down at her lap. "They took him," she whispered, "this morning, before the sun came up. He was crying, but they put him in a wagon anyway." Selah's throat closed. She nodded once and turned away before Patience could see her face. She waited until full dark. The quarter house filled with the sounds of exhausted sleep, snoring, shifting blankets, the creak of wooden frames. Selah lay still on her bunk until she was certain no one was awake. Then she rose. She retrieved the food pouch from beneath her mattress and slipped it over her shoulder. From beneath her pillow, she pulled a small carved bird, no bigger than her thumb, whittled from soft pine. Isaac had made it for her last winter, working on it in secret for weeks. The wings were uneven, and the beak was too thick, but she loved it more than anything she owned. She tucked the bird into her pocket and moved toward the door. Outside, the night was moonless. Clouds covered the stars. The darkness felt complete, like stepping into a held breath. Selah stood for a moment, listening. The crickets sang. The wind moved through the live oaks. Somewhere far off, a hound bayed once and fell silent. She thought of Isaac's face. She thought of her mother waking tomorrow to find both her children gone. Then she turned west, toward the marsh, and began to walk. The marsh swallowed her whole. Selah pushed through the first wall of reeds, their dry edges scraping against her arms. The ground beneath her feet turned soft, then softer still, until each step made a wet, sucking sound. She moved slowly, testing each footfall before committing her weight. The darkness pressed close around her, broken only by fragments of cloud-filtered moonlight that turned the water silver. She knew this place. Not well, but enough. Last spring, the mistress's carriage mule had wandered into the marsh's outer edge, spooked by a snake. Selah had tracked him for half a day, following broken reeds and hoof prints in the mud until she found him standing knee-deep in black water, too stubborn to move. She had coaxed him out with handfuls of grass and gentle words, leading him back by nothing but patience. Now she used those same paths. She recognized the shape of certain cypress trunks, the way their roots twisted above the waterline like gnarled fingers. She stepped from root to root, avoiding the deeper pools that looked solid, but would drag her down if she trusted them. The reeds thinned. Open water stretched before her, dark as ink. She waded in up to her knees, feeling the cold seep through her dress. Something moved beneath the surface, a fish, or perhaps a snake, and she froze until the ripples faded. The moon broke through the clouds for a moment, casting pale light across the marsh. Selah paused, listening. Behind her, far in the distance, she heard nothing but wind and the occasional croak of a bullfrog. She kept moving. Miles away, Mr. Brant walked the perimeter of the quarter houses, a lantern swinging from his hand. He made this circuit every night, counting shadows, checking doors. He took pride in his thoroughness. Nothing escaped his notice. Tonight, he counted one shadow too few. He pushed open the door of the quarter house and held the lantern high. The light fell across sleeping forms bundled in thin blankets. He walked between the bunks, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. When he reached the empty bunk in the corner, he stopped. The blanket lay folded. The mattress showed no impression. Mr. Brant's jaw tightened. He spun on his heel and strode toward the main house, his lantern swinging wildly. 10 minutes later, the master stood on the front porch in his nightshirt, his face red with fury. "Which one?" he demanded. "The girl called Selah," Mr. Brant said. 10 years old. Tends the animals. "When?" "Can't say for certain. Sometime after dark." The master swore and turned back toward the house. "Get the dogs ready. We leave at first light." Mr. Brant nodded and hurried toward the kennels, already planning his route through the marsh. By dawn, the plantation erupted into chaos. Field hands were pulled from their work to form search lines. The mistress stood on the porch, wringing her hands, while the master paced and shouted orders. Mr. Brant stood beside the kennels, checking the leather leads one by one. The 10 hunting dogs strained against their restraints, sensing the excitement. They were lean and powerful, bred for endurance and scent work. Mr. Brant knew each one by temperament and skill. Ash, the eldest, stood calm and watchful, his gray muzzle flecked with white. Copper barked once, sharp and eager. Bristle paced in tight circles. Tarn sat on his haunches, waiting. Willow whined softly. Pike lunged forward, restrained by his lead. Latch scratched at the ground. Bramble stood still, ears pricked. Gull panted with his tongue hanging loose. Sire, the youngest, yipped and jumped. Mr. Brant released them in pairs, letting them catch the scent from Selah's abandoned blanket. The dogs surged forward, noses to the ground, and the hunt began. Selah heard them before noon. She had spent the morning crossing shallow channels, stepping carefully from rock to root. Twice she waded through water up to her waist, holding her food pouch above her head. She climbed onto muddy banks and slid back down, her dress soaked and heavy. When she finally heard the barking, she stopped mid-step, water dripping from her hem. The sound came from the east, still distant but unmistakable. Multiple voices, layered and urgent. She knew those voices. "Ash," she whispered. His bark was deep and steady, like a drumbeat. Then Copper's higher pitch. Bristle's sharp staccato. Tarn's measured rhythm. She had raised most of them from puppies. She had fed them, cleaned their kennel, taught them commands with hand signals and patience. They knew her scent better than anyone's, and now they were coming for her. Selah forced herself to move. She crossed into deeper marsh, where the water ran in narrow channels between walls of saw grass. She waded through one channel, then another, hoping the water would break her scent trail. Her legs ached. Her feet were numb from cold. She spotted an abandoned deer hide, a crude platform of lashed branches wedged between 2 low trees. Hunters built them for waiting out game. This one looked old, half-rotted, but stable enough. Selah climbed up and lay flat on the platform, her cheek pressed against damp wood. She closed her eyes and tried to slow her breathing. The barking grew louder. then faded slightly as the dogs passed to the south. She rested for an hour, maybe less. When she climbed down, her legs trembled with exhaustion. She ate a piece of dried pork and the withered apple, chewing slowly. The food settled heavy in her stomach. She drank from a clear-running channel, cupping the water in her hands. Then she kept moving. The afternoon sun beat down through breaks in the canopy, turning the marsh into a humid furnace. Selah's dress clung to her skin, sweat mixed with marsh water, stinging her eyes. She pushed through mud that sucked at her ankles, grabbed twisted roots to pull herself forward, and climbed over fallen logs slick with moss. The barking returned. Closer now. Much closer. Selah's heart hammered against her ribs. She remembered the hand signals, simple gestures she had used while feeding the dogs. A raised palm meant stop. A closed fist meant wait. A sweeping motion meant come here. Would they remember? Would they listen? She did not know. The ground began to rise slightly. Ahead, a massive cypress tree stood on a raised mound of earth, its roots forming a natural platform above the waterline. Selah climbed onto the mound, her hands shaking. She turned to look back across the marsh. Shadows moved through the brush, 10 shapes, lean and purposeful, emerging from the tangled green. The dogs spread out in a wide arc, their heads low, noses working the ground. They moved with the practiced precision of a pack that had hunted together for years. Selah stood on the cypress mound, trapped, as the hunting dogs began to encircle her. The dogs completed their circle. Selah stood frozen on the cypress mound, her back pressed against the rough bark. 10 pairs of eyes fixed on her. 10 bodies, tense and ready, their muscles coiled beneath sleek coats. The wet ground squelched beneath their paws as they adjusted their positions, tightening the ring. She knew them all. Ash stood directly ahead, his gray muzzle lifted, ears forward. Beside him, Copper shifted weight from paw to paw, his rust-colored coat dark with marsh water. Bristle crouched low, teeth bared. Tarn held perfectly still, patient and focused. Willow whined softly, her tail tucked. Pike's lips curled back in a snarl. Latch panted heavily. Bramble's hackles rose along his spine. Gull circled once, then stopped. Sire, the youngest, bounced on his front legs, eager and confused. Selah's hand moved before she could think. She raised her palm, fingers spread wide. Stop! The signal was automatic, born from hundreds of feeding times when she needed the dogs to wait before rushing the food buckets. Her arm trembled as she held it steady. Ash's ears twitched. His head tilted slightly to the right. Copper stopped shifting. Tarn's focused stare broke for just a moment. Selah lowered her palm and formed a fist. Wait! Willow sat. The movement was subtle, almost involuntary, but her haunches touched the ground. Bramble's hackles flattened slightly. Even Pike's snarl softened into confused panting. The dogs remembered. Years of training surfaced through their violent orders. They had been puppies once, tumbling over each other in the kennel while Selah divided their portions and taught them patience. She had rewarded calm behavior with extra scraps. She had used these same gestures every single day. The circle held, but the certainty within it wavered. Selah's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She stood perfectly still, maintaining eye contact with Ash. His dark eyes studied her face. Recognition flickered there. Something deeper than command, deeper than training. The marsh fell silent except for the sound of water dripping from cypress branches. Then the whistle split the air. Sharp, piercing, unmistakable. Mr. Brandt's command whistle, the one that meant attack without hesitation. The spell shattered. Pike lunged first, his powerful legs driving him forward through the shallow water. But the ground beneath him was not solid. His front paws hit submerged roots, and he twisted mid-leap, crashing sideways into Copper. Both dogs went down in a tangle of limbs and yelping. Bristle charged from the left. His paws found purchase on what looked like stable mud, but was actually a thin layer over deep water. He broke through and vanished beneath the surface, with a startled bark that cut off abruptly. Tarn and Latch collided as they both tried to reach the mound from the same angle. Tarn's momentum carried him into Latch's shoulder. They spun together, snapping and snarling, confused about what they were fighting. Sire jumped toward Selah, but misjudged the distance entirely. He landed short, his body splashing into the channel between the mound and solid ground. His puppy legs flailed as he tried to climb out, slipping on the slick mud. Gull circled the mound, searching for stable footing. His paw caught in a twisted root hidden beneath the waterline. He yelped and pulled back, limping. Bramble charged straight ahead, but Willow, still sitting where she had lowered herself, was directly in his path. He tried to leap over her. His back leg caught her shoulder. They both went down in a heap of fur and confusion. Selah pressed herself against the cypress trunk, her eyes squeezed shut, her hands covering her ears. The sounds were terrible. Barking, splashing, yelping, the wet impact of bodies hitting water and mud. She wanted to scream, but her throat had closed tight. When she finally opened her eyes, the marsh had gone quiet again. Copper lay on his side in shallow water, breathing but stunned. Bristle had surfaced and was paddling weakly toward the far bank. Tarn and Latch had separated, both limping in opposite directions. Sire struggled out of the channel and retreated into the reeds, whimpering. Gull favored his caught paw, moving slowly away. Bramble and Willow had untangled themselves and were shaking off water, disoriented. Pike had disappeared entirely, either drowned or fled. Only Ash remained. He stood exactly where he had been before the whistle, his body positioned between Selah and the direction Mr. Brant's signal had come from. His gray muzzle was lowered slightly. His ears were back, not in aggression, but in something that looked like shame. Selah took a shaking breath. "Ash," she whispered. His tail moved once, not a wag, just a slight shift of acknowledgement. She stepped away from the tree trunk, moving slowly along the edge of the mound. Ash watched her, but did not follow immediately. His right front leg seemed stiff, and when he finally did move, he limped. Selah walked deeper into the marsh, glancing back every few steps. Ash followed at a distance, maintaining a protective gap between her and the sounds of Mr. Brant crashing through the brush far behind. The sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the water orange and gold. Selah's legs moved mechanically, one step after another, until she spotted a massive fallen log half submerged in mud. The center had rotted out, leaving a hollow space just large enough for her to crawl inside. She squeezed through the opening, pulling herself into the damp darkness. The smell of decay and earth surrounded her. She curled into the tightest ball she could manage, her knees pulled to her chest. Ash appeared at the entrance. He sniffed the opening, then lowered himself to the ground just outside, his body blocking the gap. Selah reached into her soggy food pouch and found the last piece of dried pork. It had turned soft and salty from marsh water. She tore it in half and extended one piece toward Ash. He took it gently from her fingers, his teeth never touching her skin. She ate her half slowly, forcing herself to chew even though her stomach felt tight and sick. In the distance, she heard voices, men calling to each other. Mr. Brant's voice rose above the others, sharp with anger and fear. Selah pressed her face against her knees and closed her eyes. Ash's breathing was steady and close. The sound was the only thing that kept the panic from swallowing her whole. She fell asleep to the rhythm of it, and to the distant shouts echoing across the darkening marsh. Dawn broke gray and cold. Mr. Brant stood in the plantation yard, his clothes torn and mud-caked, his face haggard. The master and several neighboring landowners had gathered on the porch, along with 2 professional slave catchers who had arrived at first light. 9 dogs, Mr. Brant said, his voice hoarse. 9 of the finest hunting dogs in the county. Gone. What do you mean, gone? One of the landowners demanded. Mr. Brant's hands shook as he gestured toward the marsh. That girl, she did something to them. I don't know how to explain it. When they had her cornered, she made signs with her hands. The dogs went mad. They turned on each other, drowned, disappeared. The master's face darkened. You're telling me a 10-year-old child destroyed an entire pack of trained hunting dogs? I'm telling you what I saw, Mr. Brant said. He looked around at the assembled men, desperation creeping into his voice. She has some kind of influence over animals, over wild things. I've seen her calm, spooked horses with a look. I've watched her call birds down from trees. One of the slave catchers leaned forward, interested. What kind of influence? Unnatural, Mr. Brant said firmly. That's the only word for it. Mistress Caroline appeared in the doorway, her face pale. I knew there was something strange about that girl. Too clever, too quiet, always watching. The master turned to the slave catchers. I'll pay double your usual rate, but I want her brought back alive. We need to make an example. The taller slave catcher nodded slowly. If what he says is true, we'll need more men. And dogs from another county, ones she hasn't had contact with. Get whatever you need, the master said. By mid-morning, word had spread through the neighboring plantations. Enslaved people working the fields whispered the story to each other, their voices low but urgent. A child who commanded wild creatures. A girl who could turn hunting dogs against their masters. The white community heard a different version. A dangerous runaway with unnatural powers. A threat that needed to be eliminated before she influenced others. The fear spread in both directions, growing with each retelling. Sela woke to sunlight filtering through the gaps in the rotted log. Her body ached everywhere. Her dress had dried stiff with mud. Her throat was parched, and her stomach cramped with hunger. She crawled out of the hollow, blinking against the bright morning light. Ash still lay at the entrance. He lifted his head when she emerged, his tail thumping once against the ground. He looked weaker than yesterday. His eyes were dull, and when he stood, his limp was more pronounced. Sela knelt beside him and ran her hand along his side. She could feel his ribs too clearly beneath his coat. We need to find water, she whispered. Ash's ears perked up at her voice, but he did not move with his usual energy. Sela looked out across the marsh. The morning was quiet. No voices, no whistles, no sound of pursuit. She did not know that miles away, men were gathering. She did not know that her name was being spoken with fear and anger. She did not know that the hunt for her had transformed into something far more dangerous than a simple search for a runaway child. She knew only that Ash was beside her, and that she needed to keep moving. The morning sun climbed slowly through the cypress canopy, casting long shadows across the water. Sela moved carefully along a narrow ridge of solid ground, testing each step before putting her full weight down. Ash followed several paces behind, his limp more obvious in daylight. She stopped every few minutes to let him catch up. Each time, he would reach her side and lower his head, waiting for her hand on his shoulder before continuing. His loyalty made her chest feel tight. Just a little farther, she whispered, though she had no idea how far they needed to go. The marsh grew thicker as they traveled deeper. Vines hung from twisted branches overhead, creating natural curtains. The ground became less predictable. Patches of firm earth mixed with sudden pockets of deep mud that could swallow a foot to the ankle. Sela found a walking stick, a fallen branch still sturdy enough to support her weight. She used it to probe the ground ahead, learning to read the subtle differences in how the stick sank. Ash watched her technique and began choosing his own path more carefully, stepping only where she had already tested. By midday, the heat had become oppressive. Mosquitoes swarmed in thick clouds. Selah's arms were covered in bites, each one a small point of fire on her skin. She wanted to scratch, but forced herself to keep moving. Then she saw the marks. They were carved into a massive oak tree at the edge of a small clearing. Simple symbols that looked like scratches at first glance. But Selah had seen similar marks on fence posts back at the plantation. Marks that told the enslaved workers which paths to take when delivering goods. She approached the tree and traced the symbols with her finger. 3 parallel lines, then a circle, then an arrow pointing east. Ash sniffed the base of the tree and whined softly. Selah followed his gaze and saw it. A structure so well camouflaged that it had nearly disappeared into the landscape. It was a hut, partially sunken into the ground, its roof covered in thick moss and fallen branches. The walls were made of mud and woven reeds, built low to blend with the surrounding vegetation. She approached slowly, watching for any sign of recent occupation. The entrance was a low opening barely wide enough for her to crawl through. She peered inside, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness. Empty, but not abandoned. Selah crawled inside, Ash squeezing in behind her. The interior was small, just large enough for 2 people to lie down. The floor was packed earth, dry despite the surrounding marsh. The walls were reinforced with branches, and the roof had been carefully constructed to shed water. In one corner, she found a collection of stone tools, a sharp-edged rock for cutting, several smooth stones for grinding. A wooden frame was built into the wall, designed for drying meat or fish. And in a niche carved into the packed earth, hidden beneath a flat stone, Selah discovered a leather pouch. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were 3 small journals, their pages yellowed and fragile. The writing was careful and clear, done with what looked like charcoal or ink made from berries. Selah could read. She had learned secretly by watching Isaac practice letters the mistress's son was taught. But these journals were different. They were practical, direct, written by people who had survived exactly what she was surviving now. She opened the first journal and began to read. When dogs track you, cross water in circles before continuing straight. The confusion will slow them. Bird calls change when humans approach. Learn the alarm call of jays and crows. They will warn you before you see danger. Mark safe routes with small signs. 3 stones stacked means water nearby. A broken branch bent east means the path continues. Selah read hungrily, her finger following each line. The words were simple and clear, written by someone who understood that the reader might be frightened and exhausted. Each page offered a new piece of knowledge: how to find edible plants, how to build a fire that produced no visible smoke, how to read the behavior of animals to predict weather and human presence. Ash lay down beside her, his breathing steady but shallow. She paused her reading to check on him, running her hand along his side. He was warm, perhaps too warm. She found a small wooden bowl in the corner and crawled back outside to fill it with marsh water. When she returned, Ash drank slowly. She sat beside him and continued reading. The second journal contained maps, crude but detailed drawings of the surrounding marsh, with symbols indicating safe paths, quicksand areas, and places where fresh water could be found. Selah studied each map carefully, committing the symbols to memory. The third journal was different. It contained stories, brief accounts of people who had passed through this hideout. Some had moved north successfully, others had been caught and returned. One entry, written in a shaking hand, simply said, "Made it to the river. May God protect those who follow." Selah closed the journal and sat in the dim light, absorbing everything she had learned. She understood now that she was not the first to flee this way. Others had walked these same paths, hidden in these same places, used these same strategies to survive. She spent the afternoon practicing what she had read. She moved through the clearing surrounding the hut, learning to walk without snapping twigs or disturbing leaves. She listened to the birds overhead, identifying the different calls. When a crow suddenly cried out in alarm, she froze and waited, watching the direction of its call until she understood it was reacting to a snake, not a human. She found the carved symbols on other trees around the clearing. 3 stones, stacked near the hut's entrance, led her to a small spring bubbling up from the ground. The water was clear and cold. She drank deeply and filled the bowl for Ash again. As late afternoon arrived, she heard them, the sound of horse hooves, still distant, but moving through the marsh with purpose. Selah's heart hammered against her ribs. She crawled back into the hut and grabbed the first journal, flipping through the pages until she found the section on misdirection. Create false trails using scent. Drag wet cloth soaked in your sweat through vegetation, leading away from your true path. Hunters and dogs will follow. She tore a strip from the hem of her dress and rubbed it against her neck and arms until it was damp with sweat. Then she crawled out of the hut and moved quickly to the eastern edge of the clearing, dragging the cloth through bushes and across muddy ground, creating a clear trail leading toward a thick tangle of thorns and fallen logs. She repeated the process twice more, creating 3 different false trails radiating from the clearing, each one leading into difficult terrain. Then she climbed. The oak tree with the carved symbols had low, sturdy branches. Selah pulled herself up, her arms burning with effort, until she was high enough to see across the clearing. She pressed herself against the trunk and became very still. Ash remained in the hut below, his gray coat nearly invisible in the shadows. The horses appeared just before sunset. 2 men rode slowly into the clearing, their eyes scanning the ground. Both carried rifles. One had a dog on a leash, not one of the plantation dogs, but a bloodhound from somewhere else. Selah held her breath. The bloodhound caught the scent immediately and pulled toward the eastern trail, the one Selah had laid most recently. The men followed, their horses picking carefully through the underbrush. She watched them disappear into the thorns, heard their curses as branches caught their clothes and scratched their faces. They would find nothing at the end of that trail except more marsh and more thorns. Selah waited until full dark before climbing down. Her muscles were stiff and aching. Ash emerged from the hut when he heard her feet touch the ground, his tail giving one slow wag. Inside the hut, Selah found a small metal box containing charred cloth and a piece of flint. She had watched fires being started this way before. It took several tries, her hands clumsy with exhaustion, but eventually a tiny ember caught on the charred cloth. She fed it carefully with dry moss and small twigs until she had a flame barely larger than her thumb. She shielded it with her body, keeping the light contained. By that faint glow, she returned to the journals. Ash lay beside her, his head resting on her leg. She stroked his ears absently while she read about routes north, about communities of free black people hidden in the deeper wilderness, about conductors who helped runaways cross into territory where they might truly be safe. "We can make it," she whispered to Ash. "If we keep moving tomorrow. If we're smart." Ash's tail thumped once against the packed earth floor. Selah let the ember die and curled up beside him in the darkness, the journals tucked safely back into their leather pouch. Tomorrow they would move again. Tomorrow they would use everything she had learned. Tonight, she would rest. Dawn light filtered through the moss-covered trees, painting everything in shades of gray and green. Selah woke with Ash's warm weight pressed against her side. Her muscles ached from sleeping on packed earth, but her mind felt sharper than it had in days. She crawled out of the hut and studied the morning marsh. Mist hung low over the water, thick enough to hide in. The air smelled of wet earth and decaying leaves. Ash emerged behind her, moving stiffly but with more strength than yesterday. His eyes were clearer. The rest had helped. Selah retrieved the journals one final time, memorizing the symbols for the western route. 3 stones stacked meant water. A broken branch bent west meant the path continued. She committed every detail to memory, then carefully returned the journals to their hiding place beneath the flat stone. Someone else might need them someday. They left the hideout as the sun broke over the distant tree line, moving west along the edge of shallow waters where the ground was firmest. Selah had torn another strip from her dress during the night, and now she dragged it through mud and water behind her, creating a confused trail that doubled back on itself multiple times. She remembered the journal's words, "Make your trail tell a story of panic and confusion. Make them believe you are running blindly." Every 50 paces, she stopped and mimicked bird calls she had learned yesterday. A crow's caw, a jay's warning cry. Each time she listened carefully to the responses. Birds calling back meant the area ahead was calm. Silence meant something, or someone, had disturbed them. The technique worked. Twice that morning, she heard silence ahead and changed direction, moving parallel to her intended path until the birds resumed their normal chatter. Ash followed close, his steps more confident now. He seemed to understand the need for quiet, placing his paws carefully to avoid snapping branches. Miles away, in the quarters of the Weston plantation, morning had brought new conversations. An older woman named Ruth stood by the communal fire, stirring a pot of grits. 3 younger women gathered around her, their voices low. "They saying she made those dogs turn on each other," one whispered. "Saying she just looked at them, and they went wild." Ruth shook her head slowly. "Child couldn't make nothing happen like that. Dogs just got confused, that's all." "Mr. Brant says different," another woman insisted. "Says she got some kind of power. Says the swamp itself protects her." "Mr. Brant's a fool," Ruth said firmly, but her hands trembled slightly as she stirred. The story had already spread to neighboring plantations. In the fields of the Morrison place, 2 miles south, enslaved workers paused their labor to discuss the tale in hushed tones. "Heard she's only 10 years old. Heard she can talk to animals like they was people. My cousin works at Weston. Says the whole pack of dogs is dead except one, and that one follows her like she's its master." The stories grew with each retelling, shaped by hope and fear in equal measure. For the enslaved, Selah became a symbol of impossible resistance. For the overseers and poor white laborers who worked nearby lands, she became something to fear. At a small general store where white tenant farmers gathered, the rumors took a different shape. "Unnatural, that's what it is," one man said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "A slave child shouldn't have no power like that." "Heard she's got devil marks," another claimed. "Heard that's how she controls creatures." "We ought to help hunt her down," a third added. "Can't have that kind of thing spreading. Next thing you know, they'll all think they can run off and command the woods against us." The storekeeper, an older man with gray whiskers, listened quietly and said nothing. But he knew how quickly fear could turn a child into a monster in people's minds. By midday, Selah and Ash reached firmer ground. The marsh gave way to a small grove of sweet gum trees, their star-shaped leaves providing dappled shade. Selah's feet were blistered and bleeding, her dress torn and filthy, but they had made good distance. She sat with her back against a tree trunk and opened her small food pouch. Only a few scraps remained: a piece of dried cornbread, hard as stone, and some salted pork fat she had saved. She broke the cornbread in half and gave the larger piece to Ash. He ate slowly, his tail wagging once in gratitude. "We're going to make it," she told him softly, running her fingers through his gray coat. "There's people out here who help. The journal said so. We just got to keep moving west." Ash licked her hand. They rested for an hour, hidden in the grove's shadows. Selah dozed lightly, her body desperately craving more sleep. But she forced herself awake when the sun reached its highest point. They needed to cover more ground before dark. As they prepared to leave, Selah heard a sound that made her pause. A desperate thrashing sound coming from the undergrowth nearby. She approached carefully, Ash at her side. In a small clearing, she found a heron tangled in abandoned fishing line, its long neck twisted at an awkward angle as it struggled against the wire cutting into its leg. The bird's eye fixed on her, wild with panic. Selah spoke softly, the same gentle tone she had used with frightened animals all her life. "Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you." She knelt slowly, showing her empty hands. The heron thrashed once more, then went still, exhausted. Working carefully, Selah unwound the fishing line from the bird's leg. The wire had cut deep, leaving a bleeding wound, but the leg itself seemed unbroken. She tore another strip from her already ragged dress and wrapped the wound as best she could. When she stepped back, the heron remained still for a long moment, as if testing its new freedom. Then, with a powerful beat of its wings, it lifted into the air and disappeared over the trees. Ash watched it go, his head tilted. "See?" Selah whispered. "Not everything out here wants to hurt us." Late afternoon brought another test. Selah heard horses and voices, closer than before. She counted at least 3 men, their conversation carrying across the still air. "Trail goes cold here," one said, frustration clear in his voice. "She can't have just vanished," another argued. They were perhaps 200 yards away, moving parallel to Selah's path. She remembered a technique from the second journal. Find a natural bridge, a fallen log, a stone crossing, and create prints on one side that suggest crossing, then backtrack along your original path. She found what she needed. A rotted tree that had fallen across a narrow stream, creating a natural bridge. She carefully walked across it, leaving clear footprints in the soft moss growing on the wood. On the far side, she jumped onto solid rock, leaving another set of prints suggesting she had continued into the dense forest beyond. Then she backtracked carefully along the log, stepped off onto dry stone that would show no prints, and circled back the way she had come. From her hiding place in a thick stand of palmetto, she watched the 3 men discover her false trail. They studied the prints on the log, then crossed and continued into the forest beyond, straight toward an area the journal had marked as unstable bog. She heard their shouts of alarm 10 minutes later as their horses sank into hidden mud. By the time they extracted themselves and retreated, Selah and Ash were a half-mile away, moving steadily west. Evening found them sheltering beneath a moss-draped overhang near a clear stream. Selah's hands shook as she cupped water to her mouth. She was beyond exhausted, operating on will alone. Ash drank beside her, then curled up against the overhang's back wall. Selah lay down next to him, her head resting on his warm flank. The moss hanging from the overhang created a curtain that hid them from view. Through its gaps, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She thought of Isaac, wondered where he was sleeping tonight, whether he was frightened, whether he remembered her. "I'm going to find you," she whispered to the darkness. "I'm going to reach somewhere safe, and then I'm going to find you." In the distance, she heard hounds baying, but the sound was faint and moving in the wrong direction, back toward the bog where the men had gotten stuck. They had bought themselves another night. Selah closed her eyes, her hand resting on Ash's side, feeling his steady breathing. Tomorrow, they would continue west. Tomorrow, they would get closer to the rumored settlement. Tomorrow, they would be one day farther from the plantation and one day closer to whatever future might still be possible. Tonight, beneath the moss and stars, with Ash's warmth against her side and the distant hounds chasing false trails, Selah finally let herself sleep. Sunrise painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Selah woke to Ash's gentle nudge against her shoulder, his brown eyes alert despite yesterday's exhaustion. They left the moss-covered overhang and continued west, following the stream until it branched into smaller tributaries. Selah studied the trees carefully, searching for the symbols she had memorized from the maroon journals. There, carved faintly into the bark of an old oak, a circle with 3 lines radiating upward. The journal had called it the rising sun mark. It meant safe passage ahead. She found another marking 20 paces later. 2 parallel lines slanting left. Follow the gentle slope. The terrain began to change. The marsh's wet uncertainty gave way to firmer ground covered in pine needles and fallen leaves. Tall trees created a canopy that filtered the morning light into soft patterns. The air smelled different here, cleaner, touched with wood smoke that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Ash moved more easily on the solid ground, though his limp remained. Selah kept one hand on his shoulder, drawing comfort from his presence. By mid-morning, she heard voices. She stopped immediately, pulling Ash behind a thick cluster of laurel bushes. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Voices meant people. People could mean danger. But as she listened, the voices sounded calm, unhurried. A woman laughed at something. A child asked a question too distant to make out clearly. Selah crept forward, staying low, using the techniques she had practiced. Through gaps in the foliage, she saw what looked like natural forest floor, but something about it felt purposeful, arranged. Then she understood. The settlement had been built to disappear into the landscape itself. Small structures sat partially underground, their roofs covered in earth, and growing things so they resembled natural hillocks. Stone chimneys were cleverly positioned, so smoke dispersed through rock channels before emerging in scattered wisps that looked like morning mist. Pathways were designed to follow natural deer trails. Everything had been placed with careful intention to avoid drawing eyes from a distance. People moved between the structures, black men, women, and children going about morning tasks with quiet efficiency. A woman hung washing on a line strung between trees. 2 children carried water buckets from a concealed well. An older man worked at sharpening tools in the shade of a lean-to shelter. Selah watched for several minutes, trying to decide if it was safe to reveal herself. Ash made the decision for her. He stepped forward, his tail wagging slightly, and let out a soft whuff of greeting. Every head in the settlement turned toward them. Selah stepped out from behind the bushes, raising her empty hands. She tried to speak, but exhaustion and fear tangled her words. I don't mean... An elder woman emerged from one of the underground dwellings. She was perhaps 60, her hair wrapped in a clean cloth, her dress simple but well-mended. Her face carried deep lines that spoke of both hardship and warmth. She studied Selah with eyes that seemed to see everything: the torn dress, the bleeding feet, the way the child swayed slightly from hunger and fatigue. Her gaze moved to Ash, taking in his gray coat and protective stance beside the girl. "Child," she said gently, "you look about ready to fall over." Selah's eyes filled with tears. The simple kindness in those words broke something loose inside her chest. The woman approached slowly, as one might approach a frightened animal. "My name is Miss Ora. You're safe here. Do you understand? You're safe." Selah nodded, unable to speak. "Come on then," Miss Ora said, extending her hand. "Let's get you inside and fed proper." The communal shelter was larger than it appeared from outside, a clever excavation with timber supports and a packed earth ceiling thick enough to muffle sound. Sunlight entered through carefully positioned gaps that could be closed quickly if needed. Miss Ora settled Selah on a bench near a small hearth where embers glowed softly. Another woman brought warm cornbread wrapped in cloth, and a cup of water so clean and cold it made Selah's throat ache. She ate slowly, trying not to appear desperate, but Miss Ora smiled knowingly. "Eat all you want, child. We got plenty." Between bites, Selah told her story. She spoke of Isaac's sudden disappearance, of overhearing Mistress Caroline's confession, of fleeing into the marsh. She described the hunting dogs and how only Ash survived. She mentioned finding the maroon hideout and studying the journals. Miss Aura listened without interrupting, her expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. "They're saying things about you," Miss Aura said finally. "Story's been traveling faster than you have. Some folks saying you got special powers, others saying you commanded the swamp itself." Selah shook her head quickly. "I didn't. The dogs they remembered me, and Mr. Brandt's whistle scared them. It wasn't magic. It was just confusion." "I believe you," Miss Aura said. "But belief and truth don't always travel the same roads. The story that's spreading is the one people want to believe, the one that gives them hope or gives them fear, depending on which side they stand." Ash lay near Selah's feet, accepting small pieces of cornbread she offered. His tail thumped against the earthen floor. By afternoon, Miss Aura introduced Selah to a man named Jonas, tall and lean, perhaps 40 years old, with careful eyes and hands marked by hard work. "Jonas knows the trading routes," Miss Aura explained. "Knows where they take folks when they get sold." Jonas sat across from Selah, speaking in a steady voice that demanded neither fear nor false hope. "Your brother, Isaac, you said, 6 years old, sold about a week ago from the Weston plantation?" Selah nodded. "They likely took him east," Jonas said. "There's a larger market in Charleston. Small children like him usually get sold as house servants. If he went there, we might be able to track where he ended up." Something shifted inside Selah's chest. Not certainty, but possibility. A thread of hope she had not dared to feel since the night she fled. "You think I could find him?" she whispered. "I think it's possible," Jonas said carefully. "Can't promise nothing. But possible is something." Possible was more than she had yesterday. The settlement healer, a quiet woman named Ruth, examined Ash in the late afternoon light outside the shelter. She cleaned his wounds with careful hands, applied a poultice made from herbs Selah did not recognize, and wrapped his leg with clean cloth. "He's strong," Ruth said. "Loyal, too, staying with you through all that. He'll recover if he gets rest and regular food." While Ash rested on a blanket Miss Aura provided, Selah sat near the communal fire and listened to other residents share their stories. A young woman spoke of escaping from a tobacco plantation in Virginia. Two brothers described fleeing together from a cotton field in Alabama. An older man told of losing his wife to illness during their journey north, but making it here to honor her memory by helping others. Each story was different. Each story was the same. All of them had run toward something better, even when the path was unclear. As evening settled, Miss Aura brought Selah a clean shift dress, simple and worn, but whole and fresh-smelling. She showed Selah a small alcove where she could sleep, separated from the main room by a hanging cloth. "We're planning to escort you north in 2 days," Miss Aura said. "Give you time to rest and heal up those feet. Give your friend Ash time to get stronger, too." "Why are you helping me?" Selah asked quietly. Miss Aura smiled. "Because somebody helped me once. Because children deserve better than what this world keeps trying to give them. Because it's the right thing to do." That night, Selah lay on a real pallet stuffed with corn husks, covered by a thin blanket that still felt like luxury after nights on wet ground. Ash slept beside her, his breathing deep and even. Through the shelter's walls, she heard the gentle murmur of community life, quiet conversations, soft laughter, the sound of someone singing a low hymn. For the first time since fleeing the plantation, Selah felt protected. Not safe, exactly. Safety was still something distant and uncertain, but protected, held by something larger than herself. She closed her eyes and let sleep come without fighting it. Early dawn light entered through the small window above Selah's alcove, painting the earthen walls in soft gold. She woke slowly, without fear, her body recognizing the absence of immediate danger. Ash lifted his head and looked at her, his tail wagging gently. Outside, she heard Miss Aura's voice humming a melody Selah did not know, but found beautiful anyway. She rose carefully, her muscles stiff but less painful than yesterday. She stepped out into the main room where Miss Aura was preparing morning food, cornmeal mush with bits of dried apple stirred in. "Morning, child," Miss Aura said warmly. "You sleep well?" "Yes, ma'am," Selah said, and realized, with quiet wonder, that she meant it. Dawn light filtered through the shelter's small window, painting everything in soft amber. Selah stirred on her sleeping mat, feeling the unfamiliar comfort of clean cloth beneath her and a full stomach from the night before. The sounds of early morning activity drifted through the walls, quiet footsteps, water being poured, the gentle murmur of voices beginning their day. She sat up slowly, stretching muscles that still ached, but felt stronger than yesterday. Her eyes moved immediately to the space near the door where Ash had settled the night before, his gray coat blending with the shadows. The space was empty. Selah's chest tightened. She stood quickly, moving to the doorway and looking out into the main shelter area. Miss Aura stood near the hearth, stirring something in a clay pot. 2 other women sat nearby, mending clothes. None of them looked alarmed. "Miss Aura?" Selah's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Where's Ash?" Miss Aura glanced up, her expression calm. "Didn't see him leave, child. He probably just wandered off a bit. Dogs do that sometimes, especially when they're feeling better." "But he was hurt," Selah said. "He wouldn't just. He's stronger than you think," Miss Aura said gently. "Likely went to find water or follow some scent. He'll come back." Selah nodded, but anxiety coiled tight in her stomach. She stepped outside into the cool morning air, scanning the settlement's perimeter. Several people moved between the structures, going about their morning tasks. No one seemed concerned. No one had seen a gray hunting dog. She walked the edges of the settlement, calling his name softly. "Ash, Ash, come here." Nothing. An older man carrying firewood paused near her. "You looking for that hound of yours?" "Yes, sir. Have you seen him?" "Saw him earlier, just past dawn. He was heading toward the stream west of here. Looked like he was just exploring. Dogs do that when they feel safe enough to wander." Selah thanked him and moved quickly toward the western edge of the settlement, where the woods grew thicker. Her bare feet, still tender from the journey, pressed carefully over roots and stones. She pushed through low-hanging branches, following a narrow deer path that led deeper into the trees. "Ash!" she called, louder now. "Ash, where are you?" The woods remained silent except for birdsong and the rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. Her heart beat faster. He had been so weak yesterday. What if he had collapsed somewhere? What if something had happened to him while she slept safe and warm inside the shelter? By late morning, the sun climbed higher, filtering through the canopy and scattered patches of light. Selah found faint paw prints in the soft earth near a fallen log. Large prints, spaced unevenly, as if the animal making them had been limping. She followed them carefully, her anxiety building with each step. The prints led toward the sound of running water. She emerged at a small stream, its surface reflecting the sky in broken fragments. And there, standing unsteadily at the water's edge, was Ash. Relief flooded through her so strongly she nearly stumbled. "Ash!" He turned his head toward her, his tail wagging weakly. But something was wrong. His eyes looked unfocused, and he swayed slightly, as if unsure of his footing. The poultice Ruth had applied yesterday hung loose from his leg, partially unraveled. Selah approached slowly, speaking in the calm voice she had used with him since he was a puppy. "It's all right, boy. I'm here. Let's get you back." She knelt beside him, checking his wounds. They looked no worse than yesterday, but his confusion worried her. Perhaps he had drunk too much cold water too quickly. Or perhaps the journey had simply taken more from him than she realized. She looped her arm gently around his neck, guiding him back toward the settlement. He followed slowly, leaning against her slightly for support. What Salah did not see, could not have seen, was the pair of men on horseback nearly a mile east, scanning the tree line with careful eyes. They had been tracking rumors of a settlement in these woods for weeks, and when one of them spotted a gray hunting dog moving alone near the stream, he recognized the description immediately. "That's one of Brant's hounds," the first man said quietly. "The one that went missing with the girl." "If the dog's here," the second man replied, "the settlement can't be far." They turned their horses and rode back the way they had come, moving quickly to gather more men. By afternoon, the settlement had gathered for a communal meal. The smell of cornbread and cooked greens filled the air. Selah sat near Miss Ora, helping grind dried corn between two flat stones, while Ash rested nearby on his blanket, still looking tired but more alert than he had been at the stream. Jonas stood across the clearing, speaking quietly with two other men. He glanced toward Selah occasionally, and she knew they were finalizing the route for her departure tomorrow. The thought filled her with equal parts hope and sadness. She wanted to move north, wanted to follow the thread of possibility that might lead to Isaac. But leaving this place, leaving the first real safety she had known in days, felt harder than she expected. Miss Ora worked beside her, kneading dough with practiced hands. "You'll do well up north," she said quietly. "You're smart and you're strong. Stronger than most grown folks I know." "I'm scared," Selah admitted. "Being scared and being brave aren't opposites, child. Sometimes they're the same thing." Selah was about to respond when Ash suddenly lifted his head. His ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest, despite his weakness. Miss Ora's hands stilled. "What is it?" Then Selah heard it too. Distant shouting, growing louder. The sound of horses moving fast through underbrush. Men's voices calling to each other with the sharp efficiency of a coordinated search. The settlement erupted into controlled chaos. Jonas shouted orders. People scattered toward predetermined hiding places. A woman grabbed Selah's arm, pulling her toward a storage hut at the settlement's edge. "Come on, child! Now!" Selah twisted around, looking for Ash. He struggled to stand, his legs unsteady. "Ash! Come here!" But the woman pulled harder, and Miss Ora appeared at Selah's other side, her face set with grim determination. "We have to move, Selah. Right now." "But Ash—" "He'll follow, or he won't. We can't wait." They dragged her toward the storage hut. Inside, someone had already pulled aside a stack of crates, revealing a narrow tunnel entrance cut into the earth. The first people were already descending into darkness. Selah looked back one more time and saw Ash trying to hobble toward her, his eyes locked on hers. Her chest felt like it was tearing apart. Miss Ora pushed her gently but firmly toward the tunnel. "Survival first, child. That's the rule. Always survival first." Selah descended into the tunnel, her hands finding the rough earthen walls. Behind her, she heard more people entering. Ahead, she saw dim light filtering from an exit somewhere in the distance. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person. She crawled forward on her hands and knees, the smell of damp earth filling her nose. Behind her, she heard Miss Ora's breathing, then others following. When she emerged from the tunnel's far end, she found herself in a dense thicket of bushes. Jonas stood there, helping people out and directing them to scatter in different directions. "Go west," he told Selah quickly. "Stay low. Don't stop moving." Gunfire cracked in the distance, sharp and terrifying. Selah flinched, her whole body going rigid with fear. "Go!" Jonas said again, more urgently. She ran, crashing through the underbrush with a small group of others. But within minutes, more gunfire erupted closer, and the group scattered instinctively. Selah dove behind a fallen log, pressing her body flat against the ground, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She waited, listening. Footsteps, shouting, the sound of something crashing through the woods nearby. Then, silence. She stayed frozen behind the log as the sun moved across the sky. Her legs cramped. Her throat burned with thirst, but she did not move. As evening fell, the sounds of chaos faded into distance. She lifted her head carefully, looking back toward where the settlement had been. Smoke rose in a thin gray column against the darkening sky. The shouts were gone now. Only the normal sounds of the forest remained, crickets beginning their evening song, wind moving through leaves. Selah crawled out from behind the log and moved deeper into the woods, away from the smoke. She walked until full darkness settled, then found a leaning pine tree with low branches that formed a natural shelter. She crouched beneath it, wrapping her arms around her knees, and let the truth settle over her like a weight. Ash was gone, either captured or killed in the raid. The settlement was destroyed, and it was her fault. If Ash had not wandered, if she had kept him closer, if she had never come to the settlement at all. She pressed her forehead against her knees and sat in the darkness, alone. The cold woke her before dawn. Selah opened her eyes to find herself still curled beneath the leaning pine, her body stiff and aching from sleeping on hard ground. Gray light filtered through the branches above her, too weak yet to be called morning. She sat up slowly, her muscles protesting every movement. For a long moment, she simply sat there, listening to the quiet sounds of the waking forest, birds beginning their first calls, the distant rush of water over stones, the whisper of wind through leaves. Then the memories returned, sharp and unforgiving. The raid, the gunfire, the smoke rising from where the settlement had been. Ash struggling to stand, trying to follow her as she was pulled into the tunnel. Ash, who was gone now, either captured or killed. She would never know which. Her throat tightened, but she had no tears left. She had cried herself empty last night, hidden in the darkness. Now there was only a hollow ache where something vital used to be. She thought of Miss Aura, who had shown her kindness, of Jonas, who had promised to help her find Isaac, of Ruth, who had tended Ash's wounds with gentle hands, all of them scattered or worse because of her. Because she had led danger to their door, because Ash had wandered and been seen, and men with guns had followed. Running had not saved anyone. Running had only brought destruction to those who tried to help her. The realization settled over her slowly, like frost forming on winter grass. If she kept running, she would only endanger more people. The myth Mr. Brandt had created would follow her everywhere, drawing attention and fear. She would be hunted not as a child, but as something unnatural, something that needed to be destroyed before it could spread. But what if she stopped running? What if she went back? The thought came quietly, almost too soft to hear at first, but once it arrived, it would not leave. She thought of the maroon journals she had studied in the hideout. They had taught her more than just how to survive in the wild. They had taught her how to think like someone being hunted, and how to turn that understanding back on the hunters themselves. The hunted learn the hunter's mind, one passage had read, written in careful script. Fear is a weapon. Use it wisely. Mr. Brandt had built his authority on a lie. He had claimed she possessed unnatural powers, that she could command animals and destruction. The entire region believed it now because people always believed stories that explained away their own failures and fears. But lies were fragile things. They required constant reinforcement. And Mr. Brandt, she remembered, had always been easy to rattle. She had seen it in the way he shouted when tools went missing, in how he blamed others when crops failed, in the tremor in his voice when the master questioned his decisions. What if she made him prove his own lie? What if she became the shadow he claimed to fear? She stood up slowly, brushing dirt and pine needles from her dress. Her feet were sore, her body exhausted, but her mind felt clearer than it had in days. She would go back to the plantation, not to surrender, not to be captured. To end this the only way she could, by making Mr. Brant destroy himself. Scylla spent the morning retracing paths she had fled days ago, moving slowly and carefully. She used every technique the maroon journals had taught her, stepping on stones and fallen logs to avoid leaving prints, moving during bird activity when natural sounds would cover her passage, staying low and watching ahead before advancing. The marsh gave way to firmer ground. She recognized landmarks: a lightning-split oak, a collapsed fence post, the curve of a creek bed she had waded through in darkness. By mid-afternoon, she reached the outer fields of the Weston plantation. She crouched behind a dense wall of honeysuckle vines, watching the distant figures moving through rows of cotton. The sight of the place felt strange now, as if she were looking at something from another life entirely. She scanned the yard carefully, searching for Mr. Brant. She found him near the barn, shouting at two workers who stood with their heads bowed. Even from this distance, she could see the sharpness in his movements, the way he gestured wildly with one hand while the other gripped a coiled whip he did not use. He looked thinner than she remembered. His face seemed drawn, his shoulders held too tight. When one of the workers tried to respond, Mr. Brant cut him off with a bark of anger, then spun around to stare at the tree line where Scylla hid. She went very still, her breath catching. But he was not looking at her specifically. He was looking everywhere at once, his gaze jumping from shadow to shadow as if expecting something to emerge. Paranoid. He was already paranoid. Good. Scylla remembered another passage from the journals. A man who fears shadows will see them everywhere. Give him shadows, and let his own mind do the rest. She settled deeper into her hiding place and waited for evening. As the sun descended toward the horizon, workers returned from the fields. The plantation settled into the rhythms of early evening. Cooking fires lit, voices calling across the yard. Animals tended in their pens. Scylla moved carefully through the growing dusk, staying within the cover of trees and tall grass. She circled the plantation's edge, observing, remembering. She noted where Mr. Brant walked during his evening rounds, how often he glanced toward the woods, where he paused to listen. She also noticed other things, small opportunities. A loose branch hanging from a tree near the path he walked, a section of fence where wooden slats had warped just enough to rattle when wind passed through, a pile of old bones behind the smokehouse, remnants from butchered animals, sun-bleached and scattered. She began arranging things. First, she tied the loose branch with a thin strip of vine so it would swing gently in the breeze but catch on neighboring branches, creating an irregular tapping sound. She positioned it carefully so it would be loudest exactly where Mr. Brant liked to stand during his evening watch. Next, she gathered some of the scattered bones and arranged them in a loose pattern near the edge of the yard. Not quite a circle, not quite random. Something that might look accidental at first glance, but would nag at the mind of someone already looking for signs. Then she found a flat stone and carved shallow marks into the dirt near the barn's foundation. Marks similar to the symbols she had seen in the maroon hideout. She did not know what they meant, but Mr. Brant would not know that. He would see only something deliberate, something intentional. Finally, as full darkness settled and the plantation grew quieter, she positioned herself near the old hogshead barrel behind the barn. From here, she could see most of the yard, while remaining hidden in deep shadow. She waited, listening to the sounds of the evening, distant conversation from the quarter houses, the crackle of fires, the low hoot of an owl beginning its nightly hunt. Then she lifted her head and made a sound, a soft, whistling call that mimicked the marsh bird she had heard during her escape. The call carried across the yard, echoing slightly off the barn's walls. She paused, counting slowly to 30, then repeated the call from a slightly different angle. Across the yard, a door slammed open. Mr. Brant emerged from the overseer's house, holding a lantern high. His head swiveled toward the sound, his body rigid with tension. "Who's there?" he shouted. "Show yourself!" Silence answered him. Sela remained perfectly still. Mr. Brant took several steps into the yard, his boots crunching on gravel. He swung the lantern left and right, its light cutting through darkness in jerky arcs. "I know you're out there," he called again, his voice rising. "I know what you are." Sela waited until he turned partially away, then made the bird call again, this time from the opposite direction. Mr. Brant spun so fast he nearly dropped the lantern. "There! You hear that? You all hear that?" Several workers had emerged from the quarter houses, drawn by his shouting. They stood in doorways, watching him with wary expressions. The master's voice called from the main house. "Brant, what is all this noise?" "It's the girl, sir," Mr. Brant shouted back. "She's here. She's watching." "I don't see anyone, Brant." "She's there, in the trees, calling to something." The master appeared on the porch, holding his own lamp. He looked toward the tree line, then back at Mr. Brant. "I hear only an owl, Brant. Settle yourself." "No, sir, it's not. It was Mr. Brant's voice cracked slightly. He turned in a full circle, his lantern swinging wildly. "She's out there, watching, waiting." One of the workers whispered something to another. Sela could not hear the words, but she saw the look they exchanged, concern mixed with something else, doubt, perhaps, or pity. The master descended from the porch slowly. "Brant, how long since you slept properly?" "I sleep fine, sir." "It's the girl. She's doing this. Just like with the dogs. The girl is a child, Brant. A frightened, runaway child." "No, sir. She's more than that. I've seen—" "What have you seen?" Mr. Brant opened his mouth, then closed it again. His hands trembled slightly around the lantern handle. The master sighed. "Go inside, Brant. Get some rest." "But, sir—" "That's an order." Mr. Brant stood frozen for a moment, his face a mixture of frustration and fear. Then he turned jerkily and walked back toward the overseer's house, muttering under his breath. The workers slowly returned to their homes. The master stood on the porch a moment longer, looking toward the woods with a furrowed brow, then went inside. The yard fell quiet again. Sela remained behind the hogshead barrel, watching the overseer's house. Through the window, she could see Mr. Brant's silhouette pacing back and forth, never stopping. She settled into her hiding place and waited. Tomorrow would bring more opportunities. Tomorrow she would tighten the net of his own fear around him. Tonight, she had planted the first seeds of his unraveling. Dawn arrived cold and gray, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain. Sela woke behind the hogshead barrel, her body stiff from sleeping curled against the wood. She listened carefully to the sounds of the plantation stirring, doors opening, voices calling, the clank of buckets being carried toward the well. She waited until she heard Mr. Brant's door slam, followed by his heavy footsteps crossing the yard toward the main house. Only then did she move. She had found the stick the night before, a branch about as long as her arm, straight enough to drag through dirt without breaking. She had stripped it of smaller twigs and tested its weight in her hands, making sure it would leave clean marks. Now she moved quickly and quietly along the edge of the overseer's cabin, staying low beneath the windows. The ground here was softer, still damp from yesterday's brief rain, perfect for what she needed. She dragged the stick in deliberate patterns, curves and lines that echoed the symbols she had seen in the maroon hideout. She did not fully understand their meaning, but she remembered their shapes well enough to recreate them. Near the door, She drew a circle with radiating lines. Along the side wall, she carved 3 parallel grooves that met at sharp angles. Behind the cabin, where the woods pressed closest, she made a series of marks that looked almost like writing but were not quite letters. The whole task took only minutes. When she finished, she stepped back into the tree line and erased her own footprints by dragging a leafy branch behind her as she retreated. Then she found a new hiding spot, a dense thicket of wild grapevines, and waited. The first workers to pass the overseer's cabin noticed the marks immediately. Selah watched as 2 men stopped mid-conversation, staring down at the symbols carved into the dirt. One of them crouched, touching the edge of a line with his finger, then pulled his hand back quickly, as if the mark might burn him. "What is that?" the second man whispered. "Don't know." "Wasn't here yesterday. Who would make such a thing?" The first man glanced toward the woods, his expression uneasy. Maybe nobody made it. They walked away quickly, their voices dropping too low for Selah to hear. But within minutes, more people arrived. A woman carrying laundry paused to stare. A child pointed and asked his mother what the marks meant. The mother pulled him away without answering. By the time the sun had fully risen, a small crowd had gathered near the overseer's cabin, everyone speaking in hushed tones. Selah could hear fragments of their conversation drifting through the morning air. "Right around his door. Heard him shouting last night. The girl they say controls. Hush now. Don't speak of it." Mr. Brandt emerged from the main house, moving quickly across the yard. He stopped short when he saw the crowd, his face going pale. "What are you all standing around for?" he shouted. "Get to work." But no one moved immediately. They simply looked at him, then at the marks near his cabin, then back at him again. Mr. Brandt followed their gazes. When he saw the symbols, he stumbled backward as if struck. His mouth opened and closed several times before words came out. "Who did this?" His voice cracked. "Who? When did—" "Nobody saw anything, sir," one of the men said quietly. "They were just there. This morning." Mr. Brandt rushed forward, staring down at the marks. His hands shook as he pointed. These are signs. Warnings. She's sending warnings." "Sir?" "The girl, Selah. She's marking me. Marking this place. Calling to—" He spun toward the woods, his eyes wild. "She's out there. Right now. Watching." The workers exchanged worried glances. One woman took a step back. A man cleared his throat uncomfortably. The master's voice cut across the yard. "Brandt! My office! Now!" Mr. Brandt turned jerkily toward the main house. "Sir, you have to see this. The marks. They're—" "Now, Brandt." Mr. Brandt hesitated, looking once more at the symbols, then hurried toward the main house. The workers dispersed slowly, their whispers following them as they returned to their tasks. Selah remained hidden, watching the overseer's cabin. She could see him through the main house window, gesturing frantically, while the master sat behind his desk with a deeply troubled expression. By mid-morning, 2 visiting landowners had arrived, men the master had invited for a business discussion about crop yields and market prices. Selah recognized them from previous visits: Mr. Dalton, who owned property to the east, and Mr. Pierce, whose plantation bordered the Weston land to the south. They gathered in the main house parlor, visible through the tall windows. The master offered them chairs and refreshment. The conversation appeared cordial at first. Then Mr. Brandt was called in. Selah could not hear the words clearly from her hiding place, but she could see everything through the window. The master gestured toward Mr. Brandt, apparently asking him to explain the morning's disturbance. Mr. Brandt began speaking, his hands moving in sharp, agitated gestures. At first, the 2 visitors listened politely, but as Mr. Brandt continued, their expressions changed. Mr. Dalton leaned back in his chair, his eyebrows raised. Mr. Pierce glanced at the master with obvious concern. Mr. Brandt's voice grew louder. loud enough now that fragments reached Selah through the window glass. Unnatural influence, controlling the creatures, stalking me specifically. Signs and symbols everywhere. The master stood, trying to interrupt. Brant, perhaps, but Mr. Brant continued, turning toward the window, pointing at the woods. She's out there, right now. I know she is. She watches me every night. She sends birds to call my name. She… Brant. The master's voice was sharp now. That is enough. But, sir, the dogs, the marks, she's… Enough, I said. Silence fell in the parlor. Mr. Dalton and Mr. Pierce sat very still, their faces carefully neutral. The master's jaw was clenched tight, a muscle twitching near his temple. Gentlemen, the master said quietly, if you'll excuse us for a moment. The two visitors rose and stepped outside onto the porch, closing the door behind them. Through the window, Selah saw the master lean close to Mr. Brant, speaking in low, intense tones. Mr. Brant's face went from red to white. He shook his head desperately, tried to speak, was cut off again. Finally, the master pointed toward the door. Mr. Brant stood frozen for several heartbeats, then turned and walked out stiffly. He crossed the yard without looking at anyone, went into the overseer's cabin, and emerged minutes later carrying a canvas bag. His movements were jerky, mechanical. When he passed a group of workers, he shouted something Selah could not make out. Something about lies and ungrateful fools, and the girl in the woods who would curse them all. Then he mounted his horse and rode away, his voice still carrying back across the fields. Threats aimed at shadows, promises of return, accusations hurled at empty air. The workers watched him go in silence. The master stood on the porch with Mr. Dalton and Mr. Pierce, all three men looking uncomfortable. After a moment, they returned inside, and the plantation slowly resumed its routines. Selah stayed hidden until the sun reached its peak, making sure Mr. Brant truly was gone. Then she slipped back into the deeper woods, moving carefully through underbrush and around familiar landmarks. She had done what she came to do. Mr. Brant's lies had finally consumed him. His own fear had become the weapon that destroyed his authority, but she felt no triumph, only exhaustion, and the hollow ache of everything she had lost. She walked for an hour before she heard the quiet whistle. 3 short notes, a pause, then 2 more. A pattern from the maroon journals. She froze, listening. The whistle came again, closer now. Selah? A voice called softly. It's Jonas. Don't be afraid. She recognized the voice. The man from the hidden community, the one who had known about trade routes and conductors. She stepped out from behind a pine tree. Jonas emerged from the opposite direction, moving with practiced silence. He looked tired but unharmed, his clothes dusty from travel. When he saw her, relief crossed his face. Thank God, he said. I've been tracking you for 2 days. How did you… You left signs without meaning to. Broken branches at certain angles, footprints near water. I know what to look for. He approached slowly, keeping his hands visible. The raid scattered us, but most got away. Miss Aura is safe. She wanted me to find you. Ash, I don't know about the dog for certain, Jonas said gently, but I saw tracks heading north during the confusion. Big paw prints, moving fast. He might have followed you when you ran. Dogs are loyal that way. The words settled over Selah like a blanket. Not certainty, but possibility. Hope. There's a route active tonight, Jonas continued. Conductors waiting at a crossing point 10 miles north. I have papers for you. Forged, but good enough to pass inspection if you're careful. And a schedule. They'll move you in stages. Virginia first, then Pennsylvania. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document and a small cloth-wrapped package. Food for the journey. The papers say you're a free child traveling with family. Memorize the name written there. Practice saying it until it feels natural. Selah took the items, her hands trembling slightly. "Why are you helping me?" "Because someone helped me once," Jonas said simply. "And because children shouldn't have to fight wars alone." They walked together through the afternoon, Jonas pointing out landmarks and teaching her what to watch for. Signal marks carved into trees, safe houses identified by specific door colors, phrases to use when meeting conductors. As evening approached, the forest grew denser. The air smelled of pine and approaching rain. Selah's legs ached, but she kept moving, kept listening, kept learning. Jonas stopped at a clearing just as darkness began to fall. The crossing point is an hour ahead. They'll signal with lanterns at midnight. 3 flashes, a pause, then 2 more. You signal back the same way with this. He handed her a small shuttered lantern. What if they don't come? They'll come. They always do. They walked the final hour in near silence, the forest alive with night sounds. When they reached the designated spot, a gap between 2 massive oak trees, Jonas checked his pocket watch. 11:30, he said. Not long now. Selah stood beside him, the lantern heavy in her hands, watching the darkness between the trees, watching for the lights that would carry her away from this place, forever. "Jonas," she said quietly, "if you see Ash, if he really is alive somewhere, will you tell him I looked for him?" "I will," Jonas promised. "I'll tell him." They waited together as midnight approached, and somewhere in the distance, the first lantern began to flash. The first lantern flashed 3 times between the oaks. Pause. Then 2 more. Selah's hands shook as she opened the shutter on her own lantern and repeated the pattern. 3 flashes. Pause. 2 more. Jonas touched her shoulder gently. "They see you. Go now." 3 figures emerged from the darkness. 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed in plain work clothes that would draw no attention on any road. The woman stepped forward first, her face kind but cautious. "You the child Jonas sent word about?" Selah nodded. "Got your papers?" Selah handed over the folded document. The woman studied it by lantern light, then nodded approvingly. "Good forgery. You'll pass. My name's Clara. These are my brothers, Thomas and Peter. We'll get you north, but you do exactly as we say. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." Clara smiled slightly. "Smart girl. Let's move." Jonas squeezed Selah's shoulder once more, then stepped back into the shadows. Selah wanted to thank him, to say something that mattered, but the moment passed too quickly. Clara was already walking, and Selah hurried to follow. That night, they traveled on foot through dense woodland, moving in single file with Thomas leading and Peter bringing up the rear. Clara walked beside Selah, occasionally steadying her when roots caught her feet. They spoke in whispers when they spoke at all. Around dawn, they reached a weathered barn where a man waited with a wagon loaded with hay bales. He said nothing, just gestured toward a hidden compartment built beneath the wagon bed. Selah climbed inside. The space was narrow and dark, smelling of old wood and dried grass. "Breathe slow," Clara instructed through the gap before closing the panel. "We'll stop in 3 hours." The wagon jolted forward. Selah lay very still in the darkness, feeling every bump and turn. She thought about Isaac, about Ash, about Miss Ora and the scattered community. She thought about Mr. Brandt riding away in disgrace, shouting at shadows he had created. The compartment grew warm as morning progressed. Selah's legs cramped, but she stayed silent, counting her breaths the way she had counted them while hiding from slave catchers in the marsh. When the wagon finally stopped, Peter opened the panel and helped her out into a shaded grove. They gave her water and cornbread. She ate quickly while they kept watch. "You're doing well," Thomas said quietly. "Most children panic in the compartment." "I've hidden in smaller spaces," Selah replied. Thomas studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you." By the next morning, they had switched to traveling by riverboat, a small fishing vessel captained by a free black man named Samuel, who asked no questions. Selah sat in the cramped cabin below deck while the boat moved steadily northward. Clara stayed with her, teaching her to recognize certain landmarks through the porthole. "That church with the white steeple means we're past the worst checkpoints," Clara explained. "When you see rolling hills instead of flat land, you know you're getting closer to safety." The boat journey lasted through the night and into the following day. Selah slept in short bursts, waking each time the vessel changed speed or direction. She dreamed of Isaac's face, of Ash limping beside her through the marsh, of symbols carved into trees. On the third afternoon, they docked at a quiet landing hidden by willow trees. A man waited there with a horse and cart. Clara helped Selah climb up. "Last leg," Clara said. "This here's Brother William. He'll take you to the Averys. Good people. They'll keep you safe while we arrange the next connections." Selah wanted to ask when she might see Clara again, but the woman was already heading back toward the boat. Thomas and Peter raised their hands in farewell. Then they were gone. Brother William drove in silence, the cartwheels creaking steadily. The landscape had changed completely from Mississippi. The trees were different, the air cooler, the fields arranged in unfamiliar patterns. Selah watched everything, trying to memorize it all. They reached the farmhouse just as the sun began lowering toward the horizon. It was a modest building, painted white with dark shutters, surrounded by vegetable gardens and a small orchard. Chickens wandered freely in the yard. A woman emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on her apron. She was middle-aged, with gentle eyes and graying hair tucked beneath a simple bonnet. "This the child?" she asked Brother William. "Yes, ma'am." Names on her papers. The woman, Ruth Avery, Selah would learn, approached the cart and offered her hand. "Welcome, child. You're safe here. Come inside." Selah climbed down carefully. Her legs wobbled after so many days of travel. Ruth steadied her with a firm grip. "My husband Samuel's in the barn, but he'll want to meet you at supper. For now, let's get you fed and cleaned up." Inside, the house smelled of baking bread and dried herbs. Ruth led Selah to a small washroom and provided a basin of warm water, clean cloths, and a simple dress that fit reasonably well. "Take your time," Ruth said. "When you're ready, come to the kitchen." Selah washed slowly, watching the dirt swirl in the water. Dirt from 3 states, from marshes and forests and hidden compartments. When she finally looked in the small mirror above the basin, she barely recognized herself. Her face was thinner, her eyes older than they should have been. But she was here. She was North. She was alive. In the kitchen, Ruth served her vegetable stew with fresh bread and butter. Selah ate carefully, savoring every bite. Samuel arrived as she finished, a tall, quiet man with calloused hands and a kind smile. "Heard you had quite a journey," he said, sitting across from her. "Yes, sir." "Well, you're welcome here as long as needed. We've helped others before you. We'll help others after. That's just what we do." That night, Ruth showed Selah to a small room under the eaves, simple but clean, with a real bed and quilts that smelled of lavender. Selah lay down carefully, half expecting to wake in the marshes or the hidden compartment. But when morning came, she was still there. Sunlight streamed through the window. Birds sang outside, different birds than in Mississippi with unfamiliar calls. Ruth brought her breakfast and a small leather journal. "Found this in town yesterday. Thought you might have use for it. Samuel says you're a smart girl. Smart girls should write their thoughts down." Selah accepted the journal with trembling hands. She had never owned a book before, never had paper that belonged only to her. She spent the morning learning to hold the pencil properly, forming letters Ruth patiently demonstrated. The words came slowly at first, awkward and uneven, but Selah persisted, remembering the maroon journals that had saved her life. "My name is Selah," she wrote carefully. "I am 10 years old. I came from Mississippi. I am learning to be free." Around noon, Ruth asked her to help sweep the yard. Selah worked quietly, grateful for simple tasks that required no hiding or fear. The chickens scattered before her broom. The sun warmed her shoulders. She was sweeping near the fence when she noticed movement at the edge of the property. A dog limped into view, moving slowly but deliberately toward the house. Selah's heart stopped. She dropped the broom. "Ash?" The dog's ears pricked forward. His tail began to wag, weakly at first, then with growing recognition. He was thinner than she remembered, his coat matted and dusty, but his eyes were the same. Selah ran to the fence. Ash quickened his pace despite his limp, his whole body trembling with effort. When he reached her, he pressed against the fence rails, whining softly. Selah fumbled with the gate latch, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work it. Finally, it opened. Ash stumbled through and collapsed at her feet, his tail still wagging, his muzzle pushing against her hands. "Ash," Selah whispered, kneeling beside him. "You found me. You found me." She wrapped her arms around his neck, feeling his heartbeat, his warmth, the reality of him. Tears came freely now, tears she had held back through everything, through Isaac's loss, and the dog's destruction, and the raid, and the endless running. Ash licked her face gently, making the soft, huffing sound he used to make when she was sad. Ruth appeared beside them, Samuel close behind. "Well now," Ruth said quietly, "this your dog, child?" "Yes, ma'am. He's been with me since the beginning. I thought I lost him." Samuel knelt and examined Ash carefully, checking his legs and ribs. "He's been through it, that's certain. But he's strong. We can care for him here. Feed him up. Let him heal proper." "Really?" Selah looked up at them through her tears. "Really," Ruth confirmed. "Any creature that travels this far to find someone is worth keeping safe." They helped Selah guide Ash to the barn, where Samuel prepared a clean stall with fresh straw and water. Ash drank deeply, then lay down with a heavy sigh. Selah sat beside him, one hand resting on his side, feeling him breathe. "How did you find me?" she whispered. But Ash had no answer, only the steady rhythm of his breathing as exhaustion finally claimed him. That evening, after Ash had eaten and settled more comfortably, Selah returned to her room with the journal. She lit the lamp Ruth had provided and opened to a fresh page. Ash lay on a blanket beside her chair, already looking stronger after food and rest. His presence made the room feel complete. Selah thought about everything she had survived, everything she had learned, everything she still needed to do. She thought about Isaac, somewhere out there, still needing to be found. Jonas had promised to send word through northern channels, people who tracked sales and movements, who helped families reconnect. She thought about Miss Aura and the scattered community, hoping they had found new shelter. She thought about the maroon journals that had taught her how to survive, and about all the children who might need those same lessons someday. She began to write, her letters growing steadier with each line. "If they fear a child who knows her own worth," she wrote carefully, "then let every child learn it. Let them know they are smart enough to survive, brave enough to run, strong enough to rebuild. I will learn to read properly. I will find my brother. I will remember everyone who helped me. And someday, when I am able, I will help others the way I was helped. This is my promise. This is my beginning." She set down the pencil and looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple she had never seen in Mississippi. Ash shifted beside her, his paw touching her foot. Selah reached down and rested her hand on his head. Tomorrow she would ask Ruth to teach her more letters. She would write to Jonas through the channels he had described. She would begin the careful, patient work of searching for Isaac. But tonight, she simply sat with her dog and her journal, watching the light fade into darkness, feeling, for the first time in her short, hard life, something that resembled peace. I hope you found that story powerful. leave a like on the video, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.